The shrill ringing of the phone jolted me awake. I glanced at the clock, 12:17 a.m. My heart sank as an ominous feeling washed over me. Calls this late never brought good news. "Hello," I answered, my voice shaky. "Mom, it's me, Carter," the voice on the other end said. I immediately recognized my son's voice, though it had been years since I last heard it. Marcus began stirring beside me. "Who is it?" he mumbled groggily. I waved him off, focusing on the call. "Carter, what's going on? Is everything okay?" "Well, that's why I'm calling." Carter paused, and I could envision the look on his face, the same sheepish, hangdog expression he had perfected from a young age to manipulate his way out of trouble. My maternal instincts kicked in, dreading where this conversation was headed. "Just tell me straight, son. We've hit a rough patch, financially. Things are really tight right now. I didn't know who else to turn to." Carter's words tumbled out in a rushed cadence, as if hoping to soften the blow. My mind raced, memories flooding back of the countless times we had bailed Carter out in the past, the overdrawn bank accounts, mounting debts, drunken mishaps I wanted to forget. We had hoped that phase was behind us after he met Lila and started a family of his own. "So, what are you saying exactly?" I pressed, fighting to keep my voice level. "Lila and we need to move back home for a while, get back on our feet, just until I can find a steady job again." A knot twisted in my stomach. "For how long? You know your father and I were looking forward to just the two of us after the girls moved out." "I'm not sure, Mom. A few months, maybe," Carter said meekly. "But we don't have anywhere else to go." I sighed deeply, Mark's questioning eyes boring into me from across the pillow. How could I turn my own son away, regardless of his track record? Tough love never seemed to work with Carter. Okay, I relented. "If that's what you need to do for now, we'll make it work. But Carter, this has to be temporary." "Of course, Mom, you're a lifesaver. We'll be over first thing tomorrow to get settled in." The call ended abruptly, leaving me sitting upright, my heart heavy with trepidation over what I had just agreed to. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "Was that Carter? What's going on?" I turned to face my husband, unable to mask the turmoil raging inside me. "It looks like our peaceful retirement just went out the window. The prodigal son is coming home, with his entire family in tow." As I relayed the conversation to Marcus, I couldn't shake the ominous premonition that we were about to be plunged right back into the chaos and drama we had only recently escaped. Carter's words echoed in my mind. "We've hit a rough patch." But this felt more like the beginning of a Category 5 hurricane headed straight for our lives. True to his word, Carter showed up bright and early the next morning, Lila and their 4 kids in tow. The cacophony of slamming car doors and children's shrieks shattered the tranquil morning I had envisioned enjoying over coffee with Marcus. "Mom! Dad!" Carter bellowed, his booming voice carrying across the driveway. "We're here." I exchanged a weary glance with Marcus as we stepped outside, struggling to plaster on welcoming smiles. An assortment of haphazardly packed suitcases and boxes spilled out from their beat-up sedan, reminders of their hasty arrival. "Well, don't just stand there gawking," Lila snapped, herding the kids toward the house. "Give us a hand with these bags." My jaw clenched at her complete lack of gratitude. This was going to be even harder than I imagined. Over the next few hours, our once peaceful abode descended into chaos. The kids, ranging from teenagers to toddlers, bounded through every room, upending carefully arranged decor and leaving a path of destruction in their wake. Lila barked orders as if she owned the place, while Carter unhelpfully looked on, offering no assistance. As evening fell, I pulled Marcus aside in the kitchen, struggling to keep my voice down. "Can you believe the nerve of them? Waltzing in here like they run the show?" Marcus shook his head, his lips pressed into a tight line. I didn't want to say anything, but Lila's attitude is really starting to rub me the wrong way. "You're telling me," I muttered darkly. "And did you see how many boxes they brought? It looks like they fully intend to move in permanently." We had agreed to temporarily put them up, but the more I watched their entitled behavior unfold, the more I questioned that decision. Carter had assured me this was just to get them back on their feet, yet there were no signs of them actively seeking jobs or affordable housing. My blood boiled as I looked out at the disastrous scene before me. The children were strewn across the living room, deeply engrossed in video games and oblivious to the cyclone of chaos surrounding them. Lila had commandeered the recliner, barking orders through mouthfuls of snacks pilfered from our pantry. And Carter, that infuriating son of mine, was kicking back with a beer, not a care in the world. "This can't go on," I stated firmly, resolve hardening within me. "If they think they can just kick up their heels and live off us again, they've got another thing coming." Marcus gave me a worried glance but said nothing. He knew that look in my eye. I was determined to make Carter and Lila face the consequences of their self-inflicted situation, one way or another. Tough love was the only language that those two seemed to understand, and I intended to speak it fluently. "Don't you worry," I said, squeezing his hand with grim determination. "One way or another, we're going to make them take responsibility for their lives." The free ride ends today. Over the following weeks, my simmering frustration with Carter and Lila reached a boiling point. True to my suspicions, the two of them made zero effort to seek employment or find alternative living arrangements. Instead, they lazed around the house all day, slobbering on the couch and treating our home like their own personal resort. "Hey, Mom, we're out of snacks again," Carter hollered from the living room one afternoon. "Can you grab some more from the store?" I bristled, clutching the dish rag so tightly my knuckles turned white. That was the final straw. "Get off your lazy behind and get them yourself," I shouted back, storming into the room with my hands on my hips. "This is our house, not a hotel where you can lounge around barking orders." Carter looked stunned, recoiling slightly at my outburst. "Geez, no need to get all bent out of shape. I was just asking." "Just asking?" I sputtered. "That's all you ever do. Ask for handouts. When was the last time you lifted a finger around here?" Lila came sauntering in, eyes narrowed. "What's with all the yelling? Can't a person relax in peace?" I wheeled on her, fury coursing through me. "Relax? That's a riot coming from you two freeloaders. Have you even looked for a job since crashing into our lives?" "Carter's looking," Lila insisted with a dismissive wave of her hand. "The job market's tough out there." "Oh, really?" I challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're both perfectly content living off Marcus and me without contributing a dime." Carter opened his mouth to protest, but I wasn't having any of it. "Save your excuses. I spoke to Linda at the diner last week, and she mentioned they've had a now hiring sign up for over a month, but I'm guessing a little hard work doesn't appeal to you two." They faltered under my accusatory glare, neither able to offer a defense. In that moment, I knew they had been lying to us, taking advantage of our generosity while making zero effort to stand on their own 2 feet. "That's it. I've had it," I stated firmly, fighting back angry tears. "From now on, things are going to change around here. There'll be no more free rides, no more mooching off your father and me while contributing nothing in return. Consider this your wake-up call." With that, I spun on my heel and marched out of the room, the muffled sound of Lila and Carter's bickering following me down the hallway. I had put up with their entitled nonsense for far too long already. No more Mrs. Nice Mom. It was time to force their hands and make them face the real-world consequences they had been dodging for years. Deep down, I hoped that some tough love was exactly the reality check they needed to start taking responsibility for their lives. I steeled myself for the battle that was surely coming. But this time I vowed. Carter and Lila were going to learn that their free ride had permanently reached its final destination. After my blow-up with Carter and Lila, an uneasy tension hung over the house. They had clearly gotten the message that the free ride was over, but resentment simmered just beneath the surface. Sullen silences and smoldering glares replaced their usual entitlement. I confided in Marcus my resolve to follow through on real consequences this time. He agreed that Carter and Lila had taken advantage of us for far too long. "But what exactly did you have in mind?" he asked hesitantly. "You know how they are. They'll fight us every step of the way on this." I took a deep breath and laid out my plan. "We tell them that due to the increased financial burden of supporting them, we can no longer afford this house. We'll need to downsize to something more modest." Marcus's eyes widened in surprise. "You want to move and kick them out?" "Not kick them out per se," I clarified. "More like create a necessity for them to find their own place to live, A little manufactured hardship, if you will. He furrowed his brows, considering it. That's a pretty extreme step, Lena. What if they call our bluff? Then I'll ensure there's no bluff to call, I stated with steel in my voice. I've already started looking at listings for smaller rentals that would force a separation, and I may have also taken the liberty of lining up a job opportunity for our lazy son. Marcus looked at me incredulously. You didn't, I shrugged. Linda at the diner owed me a favor. She was happy to expedite an interview for Carter at the new upscale restaurant opening downtown. All I had to do was grease the wheels a little for my deadbeat son. My husband shook his head in disbelief, but the hint of a proud smile played at the corners of his mouth. You never did pull any punches, that's for sure. So what's next, then? Next, we sit Carter and Lila down for a family meeting. We lay out the new living situation, that this big house is no longer feasible for us. They'll have two choices, fish or cut bait. Marcus reached out and squeezed my hand. It's a risky gambit, but I have to admit I admire your gumption. You really think this could be the wake-up call they need? I gave a resolute nod. One way or another, those two have got to learn that their free ride is over for good. It's time they finally take responsibility for their lives, even if we have to force their hand to make it happen. With my mind made up, I felt a surge of determination. No more coddling, no more empty promises. Carter and Lila were about to face the consequences of their selfish actions head-on, whether they liked it or not. After a lifetime of learning the hard way, it was finally time for some tough love to prevail. I just hoped they were ready for the storm that was coming their way. A few days later, I called a mandatory family meeting, much to Carter and Lila's confusion and annoyance. They begrudgingly assembled in the living room, glaring at Marcus and me with resentment carved into their sullen expressions. All right, what's this all about? Carter demanded once we were all seated. If this is another lecture about getting jobs, save your breath. I leveled him with a steely gaze. Actually, this is about the fact that your father and I can no longer afford to keep supporting your family financially. We're going to have to downsize to a smaller rental home. Dead silence met my proclamation. Lila and Carter's faces cycled through a range of emotions, first shock, then outrage. You're kicking us out? Lila cried incredulously. After everything we've been through? No one's kicking you out, Marcus cut in, his tone firm. But we simply cannot sustain an entire other household under our roof anymore. It's just not feasible. Carter shot to his feet, eyes blazing. This is such crap. You're punishing us for a few weeks of couch surfing? Couch surfing? I echoed in disbelief. You two haven't lifted a finger to find work or your own place in over a month. All you do is laze around spending our hard-earned money. The accusations flew back and forth in a heated volley of raised voices and pointed fingers. Finally, I'd had enough. Slamming my palms on the coffee table, I rose to my full height and let my words slice through the commotion like a blade. That's enough. This is the bottom line. In 2 weeks' time, your father and I will be moving into a new, smaller rental. What you choose to do is up to you. Lila opened her mouth to protest, but I silenced her with a harsh look. I mean it. Either you take this opportunity to get off your backsides and find your own place, or you'll be left to fend for yourselves. The choice is yours. With that final declaration hanging in the air, I spun on my heel and stormed out of the room, Marcus following close behind. Carter and Lila's shouts of outrage trailed after us, but I was unmoved. In the kitchen, Marcus touched my arm gently. That was quite the hard line you took. You really think they'll go for it? They don't have a choice, I stated flatly. I've already put in notice to the landlord and secured a new rental across town starting in 2 weeks, and Carter's job interview is set for next Thursday. His eyes widened in surprise. You've got it all lined up already? I'll admit, your determination is impressive as always. I allowed a grim smile to crease my lips. I warned you, no more empty threats or placating them. This time, they'll face the consequences of their actions, one way or another. Even as raised voices echoed from the other room, I felt a sense of resolve. There would be no turning back from this gambit. Carter and Lila's free ride of mooching and laziness had finally reached the terminal stop. It was time for them to take responsibility and build their own lives. And if a form of tough love and manufactured hardship was what it took to make that happen, then so be it. Sometimes you have to burn the forest for the sake of new growth. The 2 weeks that followed were some of the most tumultuous of my life. True to my word, Marcus and I proceeded with our downsizing plans, while Carter and Lila scrambled to adjust to their new reality. "This is so unfair," Lila raged one evening, slamming pots and pans as she cooked dinner for her children. "We're the ones who need help, and you're just abandoning us." I bit back the urge to respond, knowing it would only escalate into another fruitless argument. She and Carter had elected to keep crashing at our soon-to-be former home until the last possible minute. In the meantime, Carter begrudgingly headed out for his interview at the upscale restaurant I had arranged. He returned later that evening, a sour look etched onto his face. "Well?" I asked cautiously. "How did it go?" Carter shrugged, flopping onto the couch. "I start next week as a line cook. Decent pay, I guess?" While his indifferent tone grated on me, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. This was the first real job opportunity Carter had seized in longer than I could remember. Of course, Lila was less than thrilled about her husband's new employment status. "So I have to do everything around here while you're off working all day," she griped loudly. "Who's going to clean, do the shopping, take care of the kids?" Carter's brow furrowed in irritation. "It's called being an adult and providing for your family, Lila. Something I haven't done in a while, admittedly." Their bickering rapidly devolved into a heated fight, with Lila hurling insults and threats of abandonment if he dared take the job. I shook my head in disbelief. Even when faced with legitimate consequences, they still found ways to deflect responsibility. As moving day approached, the tension only mounted. Night after night, raised voices echoed through the halls as Marcus and I desperately tried to tune out the cyclical drama unfolding around us. Finally, the dreaded day arrived. The movers showed up at our doorstep, ready to transport us to our new, substantially smaller rental across town. Lila and the kids watched in stunned silence from the living room as our furniture and possessions were systematically loaded onto the truck. Carter, to his credit, lent a hand with some of the heavier boxes, the first real effort I'd seen from him in ages. As the last item was loaded up, I turned to face my son and daughter-in-law one final time. "Well, we're off," I stated plainly. "I wish you two the very best. Hopefully this will be the wake-up call you need to get your lives in order." Lila opened her mouth, undoubtedly to launch into another tirade, but Carter stayed her with a weary hand. "Save it, babe," he muttered. "They've made their choice, same as us." With that, Marcus and I climbed into the moving truck's cab and departed, leaving Carter, Lila, and their kids to pick up the pieces we had left behind. A part of me ached at seeing my own son in such straits, homeless, and still stubbornly refusing to take responsibility. But deep down, I knew this was the only way. The consequences were now fully unavoidable. They would either shape up and seize this chance at redemption, or succumb to the paths of their own making. The choice rested entirely in their hands. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the profound sense that nothing would ever be the same again. But perhaps that was for the best. Sometimes ashes are required for forests to be reborn from the ground up. Only time would tell if Carter and Lila had the strength to rise from the ashes I'd left in my wake. In the weeks after Marcus and I moved out, I tried to keep my distance and let the consequences of Carter and Lila's actions play out. As much as it pained me, I knew this tough love approach was necessary for them to finally take responsibility. I shouldn't have been surprised when the first frantic call from Carter came only a month later. "Mom, you gotta help us out," he pleaded, the panic evident in his voice. "The landlord is kicking us out, says we're behind on rent." I closed my eyes, steadying myself against the familiar emotional manipulation. "How far behind are you exactly?" There was an uneasy pause before Carter admitted. "Like 3 months, maybe? I don't know. We just got behind and it snowballed from there." 3 months? I repeated incredulously. "Carter, how could you let it go that far? What about your job?" "I'm still working at the restaurant," he assured me quickly. "But most of my paycheck goes to other bills, debt, stuff like that. We just can't seem to get ahead." The all-too-familiar sense of Carter's irresponsible money management and short-sightedness washed over me. Still, I had to remain firm in my resolve, as difficult as it was. I'm sorry, son, but you've dug this hole yourselves. You know your father and I can't keep enabling you forever. Carter's voice took on a desperate, pleading tone I recognized all too well. But, Mom, what about the kids? Where are we supposed to go? My heart clenched as visions of my grandchildren being cast out onto the streets flooded my mind. But I knew if I gave in even an inch, I'd be opening the door to their cycle of dependence all over again. You're just going to have to figure it out, I stated, keeping my voice even. This is your wake-up call, Carter. For once in your life, you need to face the consequences of your own actions. His response was a grunt of anger and resigned acceptance, but I could hear Lila's distant shrieks of outrage in the background. True to form, she began blowing up my phone, hurling insults and accusations until I was forced to block her number. Part of me couldn't blame her anger. Having your life upended due to your own poor choices would infuriate anyone. But this was the tough love they needed, even if they couldn't see it yet. Sometimes you have to get brutally burned before you learn to stop playing with fire. A couple weeks later, a surprising call came from an unknown number. It was Linda, my friend from the diner, calling with an update that simultaneously shocked and vindicated me. You'll never guess who came wandering into the diner looking for work yesterday, she said in a tone laced with amused disbelief. Little Miss High and Mighty Lila herself. My jaw dropped. No way. She's actually looking for a job? Hell yes, and with a few choice words about what her lazy husband forced her into, Linda confirmed with a chuckle. I admit, it gave me a fair bit of satisfaction putting her to work bussing tables. A smile crept across my face as I digested this delicious morsel of karma. Who would have thought the day would come when Lila was humbled enough to take an honest job? Well, I can't say I'm surprised it came to this, I replied. Maybe now they'll both learn a thing or two about valuing hard work over mooching off others. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of vindicated satisfaction. For too long, Carter and Lila had skated by without facing any meaningful consequences for their laziness and entitlement. But at long last, the bill had finally come due, and this time there was no one to bail them out except themselves. Sometimes, I mused, karma has a way of serving up a cold dish of tough love whether you want it or not. As painful as this process was, I knew deep down that Carter and Lila still had an opportunity to turn their lives around, if they chose to learn from the ashes of their mistakes. Only time would tell if they were strong enough to face the fires they had started. Several months went by without a word from Carter or Lila. As much as I worried about their situation, I knew reaching out would only enable their toxic cycle of dependency. This was a battle they needed to fight themselves. Then one sunny afternoon, an unexpected knock came at the door of Marcus and I's little rental home. I opened it to find Carter standing on the doorstep, his expression a complicated mix of sheepishness and resolve. "Hey, Mom," he greeted me quietly. "You got a minute?" I eyed him warily but stepped aside to let him enter. "Where's Lila and the kids?" "They're at our new place," he replied, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "I actually came to talk to you about that." As we settled onto the couch, I couldn't help but notice how drastically Carter's demeanor had shifted. Gone was the arrogant, indignant stance I had come to expect. In its place was a sort of weary humility, the hard-won lessons of harsh realities. "Listen, Mom," he began, letting out a heavy sigh. "I just wanted to say, you were right. About all of it." My eyebrows shot up in surprise, but I remained silent, letting him continue. The tough love, kicking us out, everything. Lila and I, we had to hit rock bottom before we'd wake up and start taking responsibility for our lives. He shook his head ruefully. "I can't believe how lazy and entitled we'd become mooching off you and Dad like that." Carter's words hung in the air, their sincerity seeming to fill the space around us. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was looking at my son, the real him, not the victim act he so often put on. "We've both got jobs now, nothing fancy, but it's a start," he continued. "Took us forever to get our finances straightened out and find an affordable place after getting evicted. But we did it, no help from anyone." A proud smile tugged at the corners of my mouth hearing him recount their struggle. The consequences finally started to sink in. "I'm glad you're finally taking accountability, son. That's all I ever wanted for you and Lila. Carter nodded solemnly. It's been a humbling few months, I'll say that. We had to sell a bunch of our stuff, downgrade our lifestyle completely just to stay afloat. He paused, looking me squarely in the eyes. But as hard as it was, I realized now we needed that wake-up call. You had to rip off the Band-Aid. My throat tightened with a surge of emotions, sadness, pride, relief, all intermingling. I reached over and squeezed his hand. You have no idea how good it is to finally hear you own up to your responsibility, I told him sincerely. Your father and I only wanted to see you and Lila get on your feet, truly independent. Carter nodded again, his expression one of understanding and gratitude. I know, Mom, and we're getting there, one step at a time. Starting fresh, no more shortcuts or easy outs. As he rose to leave, pulling me into an unexpectedly fierce hug, I felt a profound sense of hope blossoming. My son was finally becoming a man. Over the next few weeks, Carter and Lila slowly rebuilt their lives, check by hard-earned check. There were no more cries for help, no more manipulative pleas. They had learned to start walking their difficult path forward on their own 2 feet. Marcus and I watched their journey from a distance with a mixture of pride and relief. The tough love approach had chipped away at their stubborn resistance and bred humility from the ashes of mistakes. Of course, they still had a long road ahead to regain stability and security. But watching them embrace honest effort and accountability gave me faith that the forest would begin to regrow from the ashes. A little wiser, a little stronger from having burned down completely. As I reflected on the tumultuous journey, I felt gratitude for having the strength to hold that line, to dole out the necessary tough love. Some painful prunings are required for new growth to finally take root and flourish.